the data. In an instant, the pitching motion is broken down into 6 stages, from 0.1 seconds to a single degree of movement, all captured and digitized. All right, 3-dimensional pitching analysis data is confirmed. And here's the amazing part. No device is attached to the player's body at all. Vector Bio.
당연하게 지그재는 네가 보는 운명 속의 작은 나무인겨 그대로 기울이다 오늘 하루도 흘러가고 그대는 빛냄새를 맡으며 나무가 들려지기
Gyeongju, a city that holds 1,000 years of history. The cherished values preserved over time have shaped who we are today. Now, through new encounters, we step into a better future. Sustainability, innovation. With the spirit of connection, a new millennium story begins. As APEC and Gyeongju come together, APEC meets Gyeongju.
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong, in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing. This uniform shapes movement into grace and turns performance into something thrilling. Now, embraced around the world, Taekwondo shares our culture, philosophy, and values with pride and spirit. Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
In our headlines on this Friday, November 28th, here in South Korea, Hong Kong is reeling in the aftermath of a deadly fire that has ravaged a residential compound of high-rise towers, as authorities say the number of casualties is set to rise. And South Korea believes a North Korean group may have been behind a major cyber attack worth millions of US dollars on Gov't, the country's largest cryptocurrency exchange. Meanwhile, acting American ambassador to South Korea, Kevin Kim, believes Seoul and Washington share security concerns beyond the Korean peninsula and that this reality will keep their ties robust. Residents over in Hong Kong are reeling in the aftermath of a deadly fire that has ravaged a residential compound of high-rise towers, as authorities there say the number of casualties is set to rise. Our Kim Do-yeon has the latest.
Charred towers and blackened empty window frames are all that remain of Hong Kong's Wang Fuk Court housing complex. These scars are the result of a 24-hour battle against flames that consume the residential high-rises. As of early Friday morning, 94 people are confirmed dead, including a rescue team member, and more than 70 are injured after Hong Kong's deadliest fire in nearly 80 years. Hundreds of people are also still unaccounted for.
And for the firefighting operation, we encounter particular difficulties in several areas. Like the fire was spreading exceptionally fast, exceptionally rapid. So as you can see, the fire spread quickly to all the 7 blocks of the estate.
As recovery efforts continue, the investigation has turned to accountability. Police have arrested 3 executives from Prestige Construction, the firm contracted to work on renovations at the complex.
Police arrested 3 men around their 50s at midnight. Who are the company executives in charge of the renovation at Wang Fuk Court? They are being detained at the moment.
They are being held on suspicion of manslaughter. Authorities seized documents and digital records during a raid on the company's offices, investigating allegations that grossly negligent practices and unsafe materials were used. Investigators are specifically examining the bamboo scaffolding and green mesh that encased the building, which may have accelerated the fire's spread. Survivors, many of whom are elderly, have been displaced to makeshift shelters in nearby shopping malls. While community donation drives are providing immediate necessities, the long-term housing prospects for these residents remain uncertain.
I feel very touched by these things. I can wear this later. These will be useful for me tonight. I will stay at my friend's house temporarily.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has ordered an all-out effort to manage the aftermath of the fire, underscoring the political sensitivity of the disaster. With the cost of housing a long-standing source of public discontent, authorities are moving rapidly to contain the fallout, viewing the tragedy as a critical test of governance for the region. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And according to the latest count, as of this Friday afternoon, by authorities in Hong Kong, at least 128 people have lost their lives to that fire. Moving on then, here on the local front, President Lee Jae-myung made his first visit to the National Intelligence Service on this Friday. According to presidential spokesperson Kang Yoo-jung, the president was briefed on the agency's achievements over the past 5 months and its future plans. Acknowledging what he called the agency's dark past, including the creation of blacklists targeting cultural figures and the fabrication of espionage cases, President Lee stressed that the NIS nonetheless has the capacity to play a central role in protecting the country. Praising its past efforts, recent effort in addressing the suspect in the murder of a Korean college student in Cambodia, the president urged the agency to fully mobilize its capabilities to combat drug trafficking organizations. And President Lee Jae-myung has named Kim Jong-chul, a professor at Yonsei Law School, as the inaugural chairperson of the Korea Media and Communications Commission. Addressing the presidential press poll on this Friday, presidential spokesperson Kang Yoo-jung said Kim was chosen for his expertise in media law and his deep understanding of the freedom of expression. The new commission was launched back in October to replace the Korea Communications Commission as the country's chief regulatory body overseeing media and telecommunications. Kim will undergo a confirmation hearing at the National Assembly, but parliamentary approval is not required for his appointment. President Lee also appointed Kim Il-tak, a professor at Kyungin Women's University, as Vice Minister for Land and Infrastructure, a post left vacant after the previous Vice Minister resigned following dispute over his real estate-related remarks. South Korea's homegrown Nuri rocket soared into space for its fourth mission this past Thursday, keeping on track the country's current ambition of 6 launches by the year 2027. Our correspondent Park Gun-woo has details.
Even after Nuri lifted off into space on Thursday, stable communication continues to be made with ground stations. Following its initial contact with the King Sejong station in Antarctica that day, the main satellite has since engaged in continuous two-way communication with Earth. The satellite is set to orbit the planet 15 times a day, observing auroras and airglow to study space weather. It's also equipped with a biocabinet to test 3D bioprinting in space to eventually print human organs. 12 sub-satellites deployed are also in steady contact with ground stations as they are on missions including testing on anti-cancer proteins and space debris disposal technologies. While the fourth Nuri launch is assessed as a success, especially marking the first private-led manufacture mission by Hana Aerospace, more Nuri projects are coming.
After the fourth launch's success, we are carrying out a series of follow-up and data analysis procedures. We also began full-scale preparations for the fifth launch starting Friday, work that had been briefly paused during this latest mission.
The fifth launch is scheduled for 2026, followed by the sixth in 2027. But Korea's ambitions go further.
For the seventh Nuri launch, we are preparing next year's budget, though not yet been finalized. Starting from the eighth launch, we plan to carry out at least one Nuri launch every year.
Still, challenges including securing consistent governmental funding and preparing for more advanced missions such as landing on the moon remain. President Lee has pledged support for the space industry, aiming to elevate South Korea into the world's top 5 space powers. With that and more ambitious plans ahead, expectations continue to grow for South Korea's progress toward becoming a true space powerhouse. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
In other news, a North Korean hacking group is suspected of having stolen millions of US dollars worth of cryptocurrency from South Korea's biggest exchange. Our An Sung-jin covers the suspicion and related investigation.
North Korean hacking group Lazarus is suspected to be the likely culprit behind a recent breach of South Korea's largest crypto exchange. According to government and industry insider sources on Friday, the authorities are conducting on-site inspections at Gov't while looking at the possibility of an administrator's account being hijacked, or the funds being transferred by someone impersonating the administrator rather than a direct server attack. Though no specifics have been confirmed, officials have noted that the circumstantial evidence strongly points toward North Korea, which suffers from a shortage of foreign currency, hacking the cryptocurrency exchange for virtual assets. The timing of the incident, which coincides with the day of a press conference regarding the merger between Naver Financial and Dunamu, also hints at the possible involvement of the North. The massive hack targeted Gov't in the early morning on Thursday, hacking around 45 billion won or $30.6 million worth of cryptocurrency. This was the first major security breach since 2019, when a total of 58 billion won or $43 million worth of Ethereum was said to have been lost. The recent security breach occurred in a hot wallet, an individual crypto wallet connected to the internet, and echoes the incident that took place 6 years ago. Currently, all digital asset deposits and withdrawals from Gov't have been suspended. Lazarus allegedly works under the regime's Reconnaissance General Bureau. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea needs to assess its own ability to build a nuclear-powered submarine before delving into related discussions with the US. Now, this is according to Foreign Minister Cho Hyun earlier on this Friday at a National Assembly Foreign Affairs Committee meeting. Cho called for a comprehensive assessment into 3 key areas: the submarine itself, the nuclear propulsion system, and nuclear fuel. He added the assessment should provide the basis for a tangible proposal for negotiations with the US. Cho also revealed that the National Security Council will lead the project, with all relevant ministries partaking in a task force format. As for updating the nuclear energy pact with the US, Cho noted that the Foreign Ministry had led the talks during the last revision in 2015 and will do so again this time. South Korea and the US share security concerns beyond the Korean peninsula. Now, this is according to acting American ambassador to Seoul, Kevin Kim, during a related forum, where he added that this reality will keep the alliance robust in the years ahead. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung covers his remarks.
America's future depends on Korea, and Korea's future depends on America, especially amid the complex security environment in Northeast Asia. That is what acting U.S. Ambassador to South Korea Kevin Kim said during a lecture he gave at the Dragon Hill Lodge in the former U.S. Yongsan garrison in central Seoul. While taking questions at the 21st ROK-US Alliance Forum, acting U.S. Ambassador to South Korea Kevin Kim touched on the significance of the recently made joint fact sheet and highlighted the importance of the ROK-US Alliance for the coming years. As the allies move toward modernizing the decades-long alliance, he underlined the need for the two countries to address common challenges, not just on the Korean peninsula, but also in the Indo-Pacific region.
First starts with having a shared assessment of the threats that we face. Based on that combined assessment, which we all share between the United States and Korea, we will address them moving forward. And ultimately, what matters is that we strengthen deterrence on the Korean Peninsula and the Indo-Pacific region.
Such words are believed to reflect the recent U.S. view that the alliance should play a role not only in deterring North Korea, but also in keeping China and others in check. Meanwhile, he called the joint fact sheet special and historic and said the U.S. will make sure every detail is met.
It is a document that touches on every facet of our relationship: trade, economic, defense, diplomatic, our combined future, the vision of our combined future in not just the Korean Peninsula, but across the Indo-Pacific region. And we will be focused on ensuring and implementing every element of that fact sheet.
When asked about President Donald Trump's role as a possible peacemaker on the peninsula, he said he will try to provide all options for him, but in a way that ensures robust and lasting security of the Korean peninsula.
So I never want to say never about any possible options moving forward. So on the Korean peninsula, whichever path that is taken will be based on ensuring that security of the Korean Peninsula is taken care of.
Regarding the possibility of Chinese aggression against Taiwan in 2027, he was cautious in choosing his words, saying he cannot speak to the probabilities, but did say that President Trump is interested in preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. 김보경, Arirang News.
And the Trump administration has halted immigration applications from Afghan nationals following President Donald Trump's announcement of the death of one of the two National Guard members who was shot in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday. Our Moon Ji-young reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump said Thursday that one of the two National Guard members shot in Washington on Wednesday has died. The second guardsman shot by the suspected attacker, an Afghan national near the White House, remains in a critical condition. The attack immediately heightened the security concerns in the Capitol and prompted a sweeping review of asylum cases. On Wednesday, Trump called for a full review of Afghan immigrants who entered the United States during former President Joe Biden's administration.
I can report tonight that based on the best available information, the Department of Homeland Security is confident that the suspect in custody is a foreigner who entered our country from Afghanistan, a hellhole on earth. He was flown in by the Biden administration in September 2021 on those infamous flights that everybody was talking about.
Within hours of President Trump's statement, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services announced that it had suspended all immigration processing for Afghan nationals indefinitely. The agency did not provide a timeline for resuming processing and said the pause would remain in effect while federal officials conduct a broader security review. Meanwhile, U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. Jeannie Pirro identified the suspect as Ramanullah Lakanwal. Officials say Lakanwal arrived in the United States in 2021 under a special immigration program created for Afghans who assisted U.S. forces. He had helped guard American personnel during the Kabul airport evacuation, serving in a unit known locally as the Scorpion Forces.
That unit initially operated under the CIA before becoming part of Afghanistan's National Directorate of Security.
The suspect, he has been identified as Ramanullah Lakhanwal, a 29-year-old Afghan who entered the United States under Biden's Operation Allies Welcome, a program following the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Lakhanwal's background has now become central to the political debate, with lawmakers questioning whether emergency screening during the withdrawal was sufficient. Investigators are reviewing his immigration record, his activities in the United States, and any potential motive behind the attack. They are also coordinating with defense and intelligence officials to understand whether his past service may have influenced his movements. As Washington increases its security posture and federal agencies continue their review, President Trump says his administration will pursue what he calls an immediate reassessment of Afghan entry programs in the weeks ahead. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
An annual Thanksgiving parade in New York City on Thursday included characters and songs from Netflix's summer sensation K-pop Demon Hunters, in yet another indication of the strong appeal of the Korean wave beyond borders. Our Ian Jin reports.
K-culture making an impression, showing how it has secured a place in American pop culture. The 2025 edition of the annual Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade features elements of the mega-hit Netflix movie K-pop Demon Hunters. Celebrating America's biggest holiday, the streets of Manhattan once again transformed into one big stage. Marking its 99th edition, millions of spectators lined the 4-kilometer route early Thursday morning as 28 floats, 11 marching bands, and 34 balloons marched through the heart of New York City. The parade featured Derpy Tiger, the supernatural tiger-like blue creature, which is also the mascot of the fictional girl group Huntrix in K-pop Demon Hunters. The real-life voices behind Huntrix, EJ, Audrey Nuna, and Rayami, who voiced the characters Rumi, Mira, and Zoe respectively, dressed in all black, delivered a dynamic performance of their chart-topping single Golden in front of the iconic Macy's 34th Street Herald Square flagship location. K-culture being featured at this iconic holiday event is of great significance as it draws millions of spectators in person, as well as tens of millions more who watch the live broadcast. K-pop Demon Hunters is also eligible to be one of the 35 animated feature films for the 2026 Oscars, with the final list of nominations to be announced on January 22nd. And according to Netflix, K-pop Demon Hunters is its most watched film of all time, with more than 541 million hours viewed worldwide to date, along with being the highest charting soundtrack of the year, with 8 songs hitting the Billboard Hot 100 tally. Meaning the film's soundtrack could make the shortlist for Best Original Song when those nominees are announced on December 16th. Ian Jin, Arirang News.
And back here in Seoul, just ahead of Christmas next month, the National Theatre of Korea will offer its audience the chance to indulge in the works of 4 master choreographers who helped frame the foundation of modern Korean dance. Our Pyun Ye-young has a glimpse.
At the National Theatre of Korea, the soft echo of footsteps are like a quiet pulse carrying decades of Korean dance history. Inside the rehearsal studio, dancers trace shapes first imagined long before some were born. Yet the movements feel new, as if past and present are breathing in sync. This is Living Legacy, a rare convergence of 4 master choreographers whose works help define modern Korean dance. Their works return to the stage with fresh color and fresh voices. The program brings together choreography by Cho Heung-dong, Bae Jung-ae, Kim Hyun-ja, and Guk Soo-ho. Each a former director of the National Dance Company, they have a distinct artistic language that helped define a generation. Across 2 weeks in December, the company will present 4 works in a double bill format. Bae Jung-ae's Seoul Sunflower, Guk Soo-ho's Tibetan Sky, Kim Hyun-ja's Watching the Plum Blossom, and a new premiere by Cho Heung-dong titled The Gallant. Ahead of opening night, the troupe offered a preview inside the rehearsal space, unveiling key scenes and speaking about the artistic process. The choreographers say this project is an immense privilege that allows them to carry the emotional weight and cultural depth of their artistry into a new era.
Inviting us seniors back like this must have taken tremendous courage, and we're deeply grateful to the artistic director for embracing that vision.
I'm now over 80, and I'm someone who has spent my entire life dancing. And yet, there is still so much I don't know. I still have more to explore, more to study, and more to pass on to the next generation.
For the dancers stepping into these iconic roles, the experience is both humbling and electrifying.
It's an honor to stand here as a dancer and work alongside the 4 teachers who carved out their dance journeys and wrote the history of the National Dance Company. From Kim Hyun-ja, I've learned not only movement, but her love for dance itself, her philosophy, and her artistic world. That has been an extraordinary gift.
Living Legacy runs from December 17th to 18th and 20th to 21st at the National Theater of Korea, offering audiences a chance to witness the lineage of Korean dance carry forward through a new generation. 변예영, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. In Turkey, Pope Leo XIV warned that escalating global conflicts are endangering the future of humanity as he began his first overseas trip since becoming Pope in May. Speaking in Ankara on Thursday, he said the world is facing a heightened phase of violence driven by military and economic power struggles. The Pope arrived for a 6-day trip that includes a visit to Lebanon and was welcomed by President Erdogan, who said the visit comes at a critical moment amid regional wars, such as in Gaza. Pope Leo emphasized unity, peace, and protection of civilians, saying humanity must not give in to choices that undermine justice and stability. In Peru, former President Pedro Castillo was sentenced to 11 years and 5 months in prison on Thursday for attempting to dissolve Congress during a political crisis 3 years ago. Judges ruled that Castillo's move to suspend the legislature on December 7, 2022, while facing impeachment hearings, amounted to rebellion and conspiracy against the state. He was removed from office and arrested the same day. Prosecutors said he tried to undermine Peru's constitution, while Castillo denied wrongdoing, calling his actions, quote, a document without consequence. His brief presidency and removal triggered years of nationwide unrest. In Sri Lanka, heavy rains triggered landslides and floods that have killed more than 40 people and left more than 20 missing, according to the country's Disaster Management Center on Thursday. Most of the deaths were reported in the central mountainous districts of Badula and Nuwala Ilia, where roads and rail lines were blocked by mud, rocks, and fallen trees. Severe weather that began last week intensified over the weekend, flooding homes and fields and forcing authorities to halt passenger trains in several areas. Officials say this is Sri Lanka's deadliest weather event since last year. 주지한, Arirang News.
It was cold this morning with temperatures plunging below zero, mainly in inland areas. The morning temperature in Seoul started 5 degrees lower than yesterday at minus 1.3 degrees Celsius. It only rose to 7 degrees by the middle of the day and continued to be chilly all day. The last weekend of November will be good to enjoy outdoor activities as the cold subsides in the afternoon. Tomorrow, the daytime temperature in Seoul will rise to 12 degrees and 15 degrees on Sunday, so it will be milder than usual. Mornings will continue to be cold. Tomorrow starts off at 1 degree in Seoul and Gwangju, Chuncheon at minus 4 degrees. Highs will move up to 15 degrees in Daejeon and Gyeongju, 17 degrees in Busan. On Saturday night, light rain of 1 millimeter is forecast in northern parts of Gyeonggi-do province and western parts of Gangwon-do province. And on Sunday night in the Seoul metropolitan area and western parts of Gangwon-do province. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session. Do stay with us.
Introducing Korean broadcast content that you won't be able to stop watching. For weary modern souls, Dr. Romantic, the quirky genius doctor of Puldam Hospital, prescribes heartwarming tales of humanity. A couple together for 7 years sees their rose-tinted glasses shatter. Can they keep their relationship alive? Discover the raw stories of youth, work, and love. Beyond what social media can show, experience the vibrant Korea through its hidden gems. Mama, the ultimate K-pop festival for global fans. Find your star in a feast of trendy music and electrifying performances. Now, the whole world enjoys it together.
Knock knock! The magical door to the world of K-animation is swinging wide open. Meet your instant new BFF, the adorable Catch. Tina Ping will have you hooked from the very first glance. Need a hand? Our Robocar Pony Rescue team is always zooming in to save the day. How about tagging along on Ping Fong and Pal's super exciting quest to reclaim their lost magic? With the mysterious life forms Kabion by your side, you can become a Kabion master and save humanity like the total hero. Protecting children's innocence while igniting their boundless imaginations. That's the magic of Korean animation. K-Animation, the ultimate bestie for kids worldwide.
South Korea's East Asian neighbors, China and Japan, are engaged in a conflict over comments by the latter's prime minister regarding Taiwan. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Friday, November 28th here in Seoul. I'm Min San-hee. Confrontation continues between Beijing and Tokyo over a remark made by Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi during a session at the House of Representatives Budget Committee on November 7th. For more on this, I have Anthony Kuhn, a correspondent for American public broadcaster NPR here in the studio. Anthony, so good to have you with us today.
Thanks. Nice to be back.
I also have Professor Kim Jae-chan, Dean of the Graduate School of International Studies at Seoul University, live on the line. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
It's good to be with you. Thank you.
Right, Anthony, for the sake of our viewers who may not have been following the feud between Beijing and Tokyo, could you begin by walking us through the start of the latest tensions between these two countries?
Yes, the dispute started on November 7th. When Prime Minister Takaichi was taking questions from lawmakers in Parliament. And the subject was the possibility of a so-called Taiwan contingency, a conflict between China in Taiwan. And the questions had to do with what could cause an existential threat, which would meet the legal requirements for Japan to mobilize its military. And for the most part, Prime Minister Takaichi stuck to what the government's line is, which is they will have to see. All sorts of things could happen, and Japan has a very restrictive constitution and security laws to be met on this. So for the most part, she said, we'll see. But then she started going into scenarios which no previous prime minister had, at least not in office. And one of the scenarios she talked about was a possible naval blockade by China of Taiwan that could constitute an existential threat and justify the mobilization of Japan's self-defense forces. Now, the closest thing to this was in 2021 when former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said a Taiwan contingency would also be a Japan contingency, but he didn't go into specific scenarios and he wasn't in office anymore. Now, the context is really important. The opposition politicians asking the questions were trying to nail her down because what constitutes an existential threat is very vague. So they don't want Japan blundering into any conflict. But being specific about this can endanger the strategic ambiguity that Japan and the U.S. have had for many, many years. China called this, a brazen act of interference in its internal affairs because it sees Taiwan as part of its own territory, and that's how the dispute got started.
All right. In the meantime, Professor Kim, the term wolf warrior diplomacy has been making headlines amid the dispute between these two East Asian neighbors. First, what exactly does this diplomacy, if you will, entail, and what have been some of the consequences of this diplomacy, Professor Kim?
Wolf warrior diplomacy refers to a very confrontational Chinese diplomacy, which I think is based on naked Chinese nationalism. And this line of diplomacy came into play in the late 2010s. And it involves not just Chinese diplomats, but also the mass public aggressively defending Chinese interests, often by confronting neighboring countries with sharp rhetoric, and more importantly, with economic coercion. One example that comes to my mind is China's retaliation against South Korea over the South Korea's decision to deploy THAAD, which is the abbreviation of Terminal High Altitude Defense. And also to Australians, China retaliated by cutting back on Australian wine and iron ore imports. I think the consequences of ulterior diplomacy are a mixed bag at best. In the short run, China was able to pressure neighboring countries into being more accommodating to its interests. But in the long run, it has strained relations not only with South Korea, but also with Australia, Japan, and with many other countries. So in the end, it gave rise to a more negative global perception of China. But this time, as Anthony just mentioned, it seems as though Japan is the one that is on the defensive side for a number of reasons.
Right. Anthony, as you said, China has used very harsh rhetoric to condemn the remarks by Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. What have been some of the actions that Japan has taken in response to these remarks?
Well, I
that
think
China has taken.
Yeah, I think you could call it a big-scale campaign. You could call it a sort of a full-court press. The goals are quite clear. They want Takaichi to take back her remarks, which is, politically not feasible domestically for her. And they want Japan to stay away from this red line that they see the Taiwan issue as being. And, they've used both diplomatic pressure, including letters to the UN, and also economic, some people would say coercion, some people would say statecraft. They've suspended once again the import of Japanese seafood. They've told Japanese visitors not to go to Japan because of public safety, because of crime, which Japan has refuted. They've cut back on flights from China to Japan. They've suspended youth exchanges and movies and a lot of things. It could cost China billions of dollars altogether. I couldn't hear Professor Kim hear him too well, but this does fit a pattern of retribution against countries, which has not been resolved until a new administration comes in. It's happened not only in South Korea, but also in Australia, also in the Philippines. But Takaichi just took office. She's got extremely high poll ratings. So to think that this dispute could continue on, past her administration is certainly very concerning. Now, China has many reasons why it might want to climb down to de-escalate this feud for its own economy, so as not to drive Japan further into the U.S. camp. But Taiwan, it says it's a red line, and it really is a higher priority than any of these other issues.
Right, for China, of course. Professor Kim, a trilateral culture ministers meeting among South Korea, Japan, and China that was initially scheduled to take place this past Monday over in Macau was cancelled in light of the ongoing conflict between Beijing and Tokyo. Do you suppose trilateral cooperation on all fronts will see a halt? And if that is the case, how does South Korea seek to navigate these latest regional tensions?
Well, unfortunately, it's not just the bilateral relations between China and Japan that are being adversely affected here. The trilateral relationship between South Korea, China, and Japan is also taking a hit. And if my memory serves me correct, wasn't only the culture ministers meeting that got just canceled. China has refused to participate in the trilateral summit between the three countries that Japan had been preparing for early next year. This issue has just blown up. And right now, Beijing has no intention to scale down the tension here. And as a matter of fact, this bilateral dispute has gotten expanded into bigger regional and international problem. China is even trying to take this issue to the United Nations and international courts. So for now, trilateral cooperation is bound to take a hit. Honestly, we just have to wait until the tension reaches its peak and then starts to ease off. For South Korea, I think it's important not to take sides with either China or Japan. Frankly, we can't really play the role of mediator here. And even the United States isn't stepping in to mediate. So what Seoul can do is to stick to the most basic principle, and that is peace between the two neighbors matters, and then the conflict needs to be resolved quickly through diplomatic means. That's the kind of basic, principled messages that we should keep emphasizing.
Right, and speaking about the U.S., Anthony, Donald Trump sought to speak on the phone separately to his Chinese and Japanese counterparts after the start of this diplomatic feud between these two countries. What do you suppose would be the broader implications of bitter ties between Beijing and Tokyo for Washington?
Yes, well, the timing was really interesting. He spoke with Chinese leaders, President Trump spoke with Chinese leader Xi Jinping by phone. Trump did not mention that they spoke about Taiwan, but China says that they did. Right after that call, Trump called Takaichi. And Trump, in his social media post about this, did not mention that they spoke about the Japan-China dispute. But some media, I believe Reuters, has reported that Trump told Takaichi, please don't add fuel to the fire. Do not, don't make things any worse than they were. So what was Trump trying to do there? Was he trying to mediate between the two? Or was he, having just spoken to Xi Jinping, trying to tamp down Takaichi? Now, I think we can say that China is feeling pretty confident following its meeting with Xi Jinping, the meeting between Xi Jinping and Trump in Busan. They feel like they've successfully fended off the trade pressures, reached a deal. And they seem to feel like they have Trump's number. And that is also a concern for Japan, because they fear that Trump could cut some sort of a deal with Xi Jinping and China that leaves them out. But because Trump didn't say exactly what he said with Takaichi, it's still very hard to say. But I think China and the U.S. see each other as the main rivals in this. And so, for example, President Biden, former President Biden, also made remarks that seemed to veer away from strategic ambiguity, but it passed. Now we're in a very different ballgame. And so Japan has a lot of reason for concern that its interests may be bypassed or ignored in the rivalry between U.S. and China.
Right. Taiwan, meanwhile, Professor Kim, has reportedly requested for membership into AUKUS. For the sake of our general audience, could you tell us a bit about the AUKUS security framework? And second, what are your thoughts regarding Taiwan's request, Professor Kim?
Well, AUKUS is basically a defense partnership among the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. But one thing that we'll have to note is that it's not a traditional alliance, but more of a framework for defense technology cooperation. And one notable example is the U.S. sharing nuclear-powered submarine technology with Australians. On top of that, three countries are working together on advanced defense technologies, things like cyber, AI, quantum, and even undersea cable projects that strengthen digital and military resilience. The whole idea is pretty much, aimed at countering China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific region. So, from Taiwan's perspective, it makes perfect sense for them to be part of something like AUKUS, because standing alone against China is very tough, So joining AUKUS would seem to make Taiwan's deterrence easier. Of course, Beijing is going to be furious. Beijing is going to push back really hard against any such move. But one thing we need to keep in mind, though, is that, as I said before, AUKUS is not a mutual defense alliance. If China were to launch a military attack on Taiwan, AUKUS is not obliged to send troops. These three countries in AUKUS are not obliged to send troops or intervene directly. So membership, itself, in and of itself, wouldn't guarantee Taiwan's defense. At best, it would give Taiwan, access to more advanced technologies and closer cooperation with the three Western countries. But it's not going to provide the security, guarantee, the kind of security guarantee you will get from a former, mutual treaty alliance.
Right, so it might be more symbolic for Taiwan then. And while Taiwan reaches out to the trilateral security framework, Anthony, China, as you mentioned, has been calling on multilateral platforms to take action against Japan by claiming that Japan's remarks on Taiwan is a violation of international law and a challenge to post-war order. What are your takeaways?
Well, actually, their letter to the UN was fairly narrow. The most important charge in that is they said that Japan is threatening the use of force against China. And Japan rebutted that. But, this year has been quite special with the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II and the beginning of the second Trump administration, which has seen a pullback from many multilateral platforms, including the UN. And so China has used this to craft a narrative. We saw on September 3rd this military parade in which China emphasized its contribution to building the post-war order by defeating Japan, by helping being an early member of the UN. But there are many holes in that. It was the Nationalist Party which ruled China at the time. They had a big hand in defeating Japan. They were the ones who were in the UN, who were the first members of the first Chinese government in the UN. Now, since Japan has been beefing up its military in recent years, China has tried to portray this as a potential return of Japanese militarism. Japan is certainly not the way it was in the 1930s. It's a stable democracy. It hasn't fought any wars. That isn't to say that some people in Japan are not concerned about Japan's direction. There is still a problem. There are people within the ruling party who continue to deny some of Japan's actions in World War II, and there are some people who don't like the way the U.S. imposed a constitution on Japan. But the market, I would say, as we saw in the September 3rd parade, the market for China's narrative of itself as defender of the international order has been fairly limited to so-called like-minded countries, including Russia, North Korea, Iran, and not the Western nations.
Right. I wonder, Professor Kim, speaking within your capacity as a scholar, do you believe the world right now, perhaps, is more prone to conflict than it was in the past? And if so, why?
Sure, I would probably say that the world is definitely more conflict prone today than, say, some 20 years ago. First of all, the US-centered unipolar international order has basically broken down. And along with that, so-called rules-based liberal international order, RBIO, that order is being increasingly challenged. A clear example is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. After the Cold War was over, most people thought that the kind of, outright aggression that Russia launched against Ukraine, this kind of aggression was not going to happen again. One sovereign state using military force to invade another sovereign state. That was pretty unthinkable. And I believe that principle, keeping other sovereign states, sovereignty intact was the most important, that was at the core of liberal international order, rules-based liberal international order. But Russia has openly defied that. Now, we oftentimes talk about the return of great, power strategic competition, return of great power politics. And historically, that kind of great power strategic rivalry tends to lead to what I would call blockization of order, blockization of the international order. And you can see this very clearly in Northeast Asian region, where the United States, South Korea, and Japan are lining up together on one side, while North Korea, China, and Russia are forming up, forming another bloc. Camp, if you will. So with this blockization, what I would call blockization, North Korea's strategic value has gone up for Beijing and Moscow, and Pyongyang knows it very well. So Pyongyang is trying to position itself as a defender of interests of China and Russia. And that, I think, is the reason why China and Russia now have very little interest in North Korea's denuclearization anymore, because North Korea's strategic values loom larger than before. So, early 2000s, we saw some sort of cooperative mechanism in Northeast Asian region, something like a six-party talks. But that is, that sort of consensus that existed back in, 2000, I don't think it's going to happen anymore.
Right, rendering quite dismal the prospects of denuclearization here on the Korean Peninsula in the near future then. All right, Professor Kim, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Anthony, thank you very much for your insights.
You're welcome.
Right, on that note, we end this week's editions of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.
엔진 점화, 이륙. 누리 5가 발사되었습니다.